Russia has warned that the price of oil could hit $300 a barrel if the West goes ahead with an oil embargo against Moscow. The United States has been looking for ways to reduce its imports from Russia and, to that effect, sent a delegation to Venezuela over the weekend. You'll recall the US imposed sanctions on Caracas in an attempt to keep President Nicolas Maduro from power. That was in 2019. So would Venezuela now be the answer to this particular energy problem? Well, I'm joined now by Richard Goldberg, who's a sanctions expert with the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Richard, thanks for joining us. Goodness me, talk of doing deals with Venezuela and indeed Iran. You could hardly have imagined that 2 weeks ago.
It's a bit hokey even to an American audience. We're not that desperate right now here in the United States. We understand why we are paying more for higher gas. We don't want to have to shift from one dictator brutality to funding another dictator's brutality in Venezuela or Iran. So I don't think from an oil market perspective this makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the Venezuelan oil industry will take a lot of time to come back online and increase its exports and its production. The Iranian oil industry is going to have a lot of risk associated with it because Republicans in the United States are going to say they're going to vow to reimpose all these oil sanctions the minute there's a Republican president. So I don't think we're going to have the calm to the market that the Biden administration wants out of these things. And then from just the values perspective, why are we going from Putin's oil to Iran's oil or Venezuela's oil? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, except perhaps there is a sense that there is an urgency required here to bring in sanctions, the ones that really bite. I mean, there is another problem here. There may be countries like the UK, for example. Boris Johnson has said, yeah, we'd like to pursue this, or at least that discussion is being had. But other countries, of course, within Europe have a much bigger concern about what it would cost them. So do you see a reality in terms of unity over oil sanctions regarding Russia?
I think one idea where we could get unity around this idea of oil sanctions is to take a page out of the playbook we used against Iran about a decade ago. What we said when we imposed our first oil sanctions on Iran was that we were still going to allow the export of oil, but money that was being paid to Iran had to stay in the importing country in escrow accounts. So if China wanted to import oil, the money couldn't go to Tehran. It had to sit in Beijing, and the same in Seoul and in Tokyo and in New Delhi and so on. I think if we were to say to European governments, Asian governments, the United States even, you don't have to end your imports, but put the money into escrow. Don't let Putin get the revenue. You will put pressure on the Kremlin without putting pressure on ourselves.
We know the Russian perspective is if you do this, it's going to create global economic chaos. You will all pay a price for this. And whilst we're in the immediate effect of an invasion and people are seeing it for themselves and it is an appalling scenario, they might think, well, we'll bear some of that cost. Over time, that becomes harder for people to consider, doesn't it? I was looking at some of the figures for like natural gas up at 345 euros per megawatt hour at one point in the course of the day. It was 16 euros a year ago. I mean, these are massive potential increases in people's living costs.
I think that's absolutely right. So I think we have to get the sanctions right. I would recommend an escrow account. I think we need to talk to allies like Saudi Arabia about swing production. It's hard to do that when you're also negotiating lifting sanctions on Iran's oil right next door, their mortal enemy, and have already taken the terrorist group, the Houthis, off the terrorist list, even though they keep attacking them with missiles. So our diplomacy with Saudi Arabia is very much diminished at the moment here in the United States. But I think in the long run, we can't just rely on sanctions. We're going to have other tools in our arsenal to deter Vladimir Putin. And frankly, the fastest way to bring stability to the oil market is to bring the conflict in Ukraine to an end.